Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 edition of the Royal Trail Museum Speaker Series. Today, the Royal Trail Museum and its cooperating society are proud to present Mr. Cary Woodruff. Cary is currently a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Toronto. He's originally from the town of Bumpass in Virginia, in the United States, and he obtained his BSc in Earth Sciences at Montana State University in Bozeman in Montana. For his senior undergraduate thesis, Cary conducted an actualistic taphonomy experiment on the first burrowing dinosaur, the small ornithopod Oryctodromeus. And for his master's, Cary decided to stay at Montana State University, where he studied the ontogeny and development and life history of Diplodocid sauropods. After completing his master's, he moved to Canada to begin his PhD in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Toronto. For his dissertation, Cary is investigating the evolution, kinematics, and life history of North American pachycephalosaurs, the dome-headed dinosaurs. Cary is truly passionate about sauropods, which are the long-necked dinosaurs, and he's interested in many other aspects and many other research topics as well, including taphonomy, histology, stegosaurs, and Saurischian dinosaurs, just to name a few. He is currently the director of paleontology at the Great Plains Dinosaur Museum in Malta, Montana, where he conducts fieldwork every summer. Today, Cary is talking about sauropods, the giants of the Mesozoic. So without further delay, I present Mr. Cary Woodruff.
Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me. If I'm not loud enough, just go like this. I'll try talking louder. I had a cold a couple weeks ago and it's ravaged my throat, so I just sound like a 40-year smoker, but please pardon that. Sauropods represent some of our most classic and iconic of dinosaurs, often referred to as the cereal box dinosaurs, right? And especially for the public, when they think of the word dinosaur, a lot of times just the mental image of the body plan of a sauropod comes to mind. And so sauropods have basically, ever since their discovery, have always graced the public's perception of dinosaurs. And this ranges from the logo of Sinclair Oil, which, of course, actually has to get its history because of paleontology expeditions digging up sauropods in the American West and a business relationship with that. Of course, the very first animation ever was Gertie the dinosaur, so Gertie the sauropod. And of course, the numerous forms of popular media, such as Littlefoot from The Land Before Time, and even the crate dragon of the first Star Wars film was a cast of the Diplodocus Carnegie holotype. But what really captivates us about sauropods collectively is their scale. I mean, they are truly titanic beings. So we think that dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops were large, and they certainly are large animals when compared to a human. But for the dinosaur scale, sauropods are hands down the largest of all dinosaurs, significantly larger. And this isn't just one or two sauropods that were particularly titanic. For their entire evolutionary history on Earth, the majority of sauropods are recorded and dominated by these truly titanic animals. And of course, we've never had any other group of animals walking around on Earth since sauropods or after that even come close to achieving their proportions. So they're incredibly fascinating animals. And in fact, the largest sauropod that we know of to date, and of course, it's always a debate, what's the largest sauropod? Are we talking about mass? Are we talking about length? And this is hard because we don't find them complete. But the sort of clear winner of recent is this monster, Patagotitan from South America. It's estimated to have been about 130 feet long, give or take. You can see beautiful life-size casts of it at the Field Museum of Chicago and the American Museum of Natural History. And over here on the right, this is one of the discoverers of Patagotitan, Diego Pol, with the femur. And that femur is 8 feet on the dot. I think second to the skull of, Torosaurus, just the, skeletally mature Triceratops. That's, single-handedly the largest bone, that, or limb bone, at least we know of, from a dinosaur. And again, of course, compared to Torosaurus, it's, one of the largest just dinosaur bones we have in general. But there are a lot of sort of misconceptions, I think, with sauropods, a lot of their history and things we sort of gloss over or sort of perpetuate that aren't necessarily factual. So throughout the course of the lecture today, I want to try to not only clarify some of these points, but go into some aspects of sauropod paleobiology that I think make them incredibly special animals. So the first popular perception that I always like to squish is there's sort of a narrative that sauropods have their heyday in the Jurassic, they kick the bucket in the late Jurassic, and of course it's because of this absence of sauropods that hadrosaurs and ceratopsians are able to dominate throughout the Cretaceous. And this narrative is only partially true if you are in East Asia and North America. But if you look at the rest of the world throughout the Mesozoic, there is an entire history of sauropods that dominate the record as the dominant terrestrial herbivores. So again, go anywhere else in the world throughout the Mesozoic and you find a dinosaur, odds are it's probably going to be a sauropod. So they really had a worldwide domination, and especially owned the market for terrestrial herbivores. And you can go, again, anywhere in the world and find sauropods. I'm a little biased. I think the American West has the best record of sauropods that we can find. And you can go to places like Dinosaur National Monument in Vernal, Utah, and you can see just these beautiful death assemblages of nearly complete to complete sauropods together. There is actually a sauropod record in Canada. It is, at least as of published now, known just from tracks, but there is actually the very first body fossil of a sauropod from Canada that's currently being described. So they were up here too, contrary to, again, popular perception that they weren't here in Canada. People also think that all sauropods are big, and again, their evolutionary history is dominated by being big, but they certainly didn't start out being big. The earliest sauropods, which are also some of our earliest dinosaurs that we know of on Earth, were small and bipedal, like here this is Saturnalia. So not only were they small and bipedal, and note the small forelimbs, the earliest sauropods were also carnivores. So sauropods that ate meat, and it's only shortly into their evolutionary history that they decide plants are kind of a good route to take for the rest of their history. But for those of us who study sauropod paleobiology, the majority of our questions, again, are size-focused and dedicated to being big. Now, I can't go into all of it today, but you simply cannot take, let's just say, for instance, we took a mouse and blow up a mouse to be the size of an elephant. So biomechanics does not work that way. You can't just simply make an animal bigger. And so sauropods have an entire evolutionary history that time and time again is documented by the bioengineering that goes on to being big. So some of the questions that sauropod paleobiologists are looking at is some sauropods, like Mamenchisaurus, have a neck that's 17 meters long. So you can imagine not only is that neck 17 meters, the bones in the neck 17 meters, so is the trachea. So imagine breathing in and out of a tube 17 meters. How the heck do you not pass out in between breaths, right? With some sauropods weighing in excess of 50 tons, how is not only the skeleton, but the muscles designed to be able to maintain that weight even through locomotion? So how do you move when you're that big? What's the soft tissue engineering that goes into that? And of course, again, weight related, all they were eating, at least these more advanced or derived sauropods, they're eating plants. So how the heck do you get to be 50 tons by just eating plants? And compared to today's standards, a lot of them were very low nutrient quality plants. So how the heck did they get to be so big? And so generally, when we're looking at and trying to make physiological inferences from dinosaurs, we use a method called the extant phylogenetic bracket. So we compare a dinosaur, we bracket it between their closest living relatives today, so crocodilians and birds. So just for an example, let's say we didn't know dinosaurs laid eggs. Crocodilians lay eggs, birds lay eggs, therefore dinosaurs probably laid eggs as well. Check mark. But there's many aspects of the sauropod, their collective biology, that really makes an EPB level approach incredibly difficult, if not impossible. They had parental care more like a crocodile. They had respiration more like a bird. But they had a stance unlike that we see in crocodilians and birds. We have evidence of muscles and soft tissues that are different from both birds and crocodilians. And again, it's their extreme size that is so different. So we can't necessarily make these direct comparisons. So it can be really hard to try to understand from this approach aspects of sauropod paleobiology. But that doesn't mean that we can't do it nonetheless. We just have to be a lot more, I think, if I can say, more innovative in our approaches to questioning sauropod physiology. So today, just two aspects, and I mean, I've even done whole short courses on sauropods, so you're getting the completely abridged version. But just two of the things I think about their overall biology that are fascinating are the necks and what they actually did with their necks, and of course, their life history. So of course, let's dive into the sexy end of the sauropod, the neck. That's received the most attention. If we look at sauropods in the Morrison Formation, so two classic ones are Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus, and they lived alongside together. If we look at the bones in their neck, we see that sauropods like Diplodocus have this split neural spine. So this split neural spine here, it's often referred to the bifurcated neural spine. And sauropods like Brachiosaurus have an unsplit rounded neural spine. And yet, regardless of this spine morphology, you always see Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus with these S-shaped, vertical swan-like necks. Well, what are these sauropods doing with their neck? Well, for time immemorial, the answer clearly, they're using these vertical necks to feed high up in trees. I mean, why would they have a long neck otherwise? And so, of course, it didn't take paleontologists very long because we're studying extinct animals. So we look at modern animals for a lot of analogs. So it didn't take paleontologists very long to realize, you guys know that there's a long-necked plant eater that's around today? And so they said, oh, of course, the giraffe. It's a perfect living example of a sauropod. And in fact, there's even a sauropod today known as Giraffa titan. So, the Titanic giraffe. But if we look a little bit closer, we see that these similarities are only skin deep. So again, we look not only at the number of vertebrae that make the neck, the size of the body, size of the neck, of course, aspects of their reproduction, their digestion, parental care, et cetera, we see that the two are in fact very, very different. And I would say that, again, the comparison between the giraffe and the sauropod really is only skin deep. And I say we need to actually stop making this association between giraffes just being the modern day sauropods. And so, of course, that begs to ask, well, if sauropods and giraffes are not one and the same, and sauropods are not using their necks like a giraffe, how were they using their necks? And this was really challenged and studied, and I think what's probably the most important sauropod paper of the modern age. And this was work done by Kent Stevens and Mike Parrish. And what they did is they looked at computer models, so scans of sauropod neck bones. And what they did is they were studying what's called range of motion. So bone tells us the way that it moves. So, right, my elbow can only move this way. If my elbow could move the other way, I have a serious problem, right? So bone dictates how it moves past one another. So what they did is in the computer, because it's a lot easier to actually manipulate two big sauropod vertebrae in the computer, is they looked at how these two bones could move past one another. Then they added another vertebra and another vertebra and another vertebra and so on and so on and so on until they got the whole neck. And they looked at how they could actually move. And amazingly, they found out that sauropods like Diplodocus, that the necks actually could move up and down only a little bit, but that they stuck out from the body horizontally, and it was great for moving side to side. So again, this horizontal, not vertical neck posture. They also did this for sauropods like Brachiosaurus and concluded that while Brachiosaurus had a more vertical neck posture than Diplodocus, no sauropods had that, that swan-shaped, telephone pole vertical neck posture. And so they argued that in the case of Diplodocus, this horizontal neck that sweeps side to side was really great and perfectly engineered for feeding on low-browsing plants. And this is just kind of neat, I think, from a historical perspective, just understanding the history of paleontological ideas, because this paper came out in '99. It was immediately picked up by Tim Haynes and incorporated into Walking with Dinosaurs later that year. And I think this is still probably the earliest case, or the shortest case, of a scientific discovery being incorporated and then disseminated to the public through the form of mass media. Such is kind of neat to understand some of the history. So that's why, if you ever wondered why the Diplodocus and Walking with Dinosaurs have these vertical necks, it's because it was right, and it was a great change. And so I will admit, I talk to Kent Stevens like once every week. I take a bullet for that man. I definitely am a disciple of Stevens' principles. And I was fortunate enough in some of my own research to sort of aspects of it that I think really supported the horizontal neck posture, which the horizontal neck posture is the most debated concept in sauropod paleobiology. There's what I call, the horizontal neckers and the wrong people. And they're that polarized, and I mean, that's how you get sauropod paleobiologists arguing with each other, is talking about the posture of the necks. So I got to, at least I think have my own contribution to said argument. And it all really started around a classic sauropod biomechanical model. So in 1942, the brilliant Scottish anatomist D.A. Thompson, looking out his window at Scotland's Forth Bridge, and he realized the body plan of a sauropod is very similar to a bridge, right? You have the two large, vertical components of the bridge, which are similar to the limbs and girdles, and you have these long extended cables. Note, even at the time, Thompson back then was thinking of horizontal sauropods, so he was ahead of his time for certain. But he came up with this classic model called the sauropod suspension bridge, and if you look up any dinosaur biomechanics work, this is the classic example you'll always see. But there are some problems, again, when people subsequently looking at Thompson tried to relay the soft tissues over the skeleton. Because again, people were looking at crocodilians, birds, and giraffes, and even though because of comparative vertebrate anatomy, so all these animals with bones, right, we mostly have the same bones, we have the same soft parts going on, but what we do with them is a little bit different. And so the same is that the anatomy of a crocodilian, a bird, and a giraffe are all very different. And people had been trying to reconstruct the soft tissues of sauropods using each one of these as a model, and of course they weren't coming to any consensus. There was always argument and disagreement. And this was no different with the neck. So when people were trying to reconstruct the anatomy of the neck, and where I come into it, the anatomy surrounding the bifurcated neural spines, so the split neural spines, people were trying to argue, was there muscle in between those two spines? Was there air sacs? What was going on? And so to try to solve that, people were just looking at animals with long necks. But as we've learned, all long necks are not created equal. So I went back to the drawing board. And while a sauropod neck is indeed a long neck, it also represents a heavy mass placed off of the shoulders. So I decided to look at a living animal today to try to understand what the soft tissue was, to find an animal that had the greatest head-to-body ratio that was alive today. And I found that in something that did not have a long neck at all. I found it in a very unusual breed of African cow that is near and dear to my heart now, called the Ankole Watusi. The Ankole Watusi is the largest horned animal on the planet. So this is Lurch. I got to work with Lurch before he died. Lurch broke his own world record several times in his life. I can at least say this, that, mad dis to ceratopsians, they had nothing in comparison to horns of Watusi. No questions asked. Lurch was a particularly amazing animal. We used to put pants on his horns to show the size, like, Jared at Subway's, like how much he'd lost. We also used to put a saddle on Lurch, and kids would ride him around, which was really cool. He was a big, gentle giant. But you can again see the mass of those horns for the body of an animal that's actually not that ridiculously big. So I had found the Watusi. We did not have a Watusi skeleton. So I literally put all my chips on the table and did this as a gamble. And I had 3 Watusi cows delivered to Bozeman, Montana, where I was doing my master's at the time. And we wanted to see, going through all of this, having these 3 exotic African cows delivered, if they had bifurcated neural spines. No one knew. So we did large-scale dissections, and of course I was very happy to report, thankfully, that the Watusi does have bifurcated neural spines. Now admittedly, it's not the same that we would see in a sauropod, but this was actually the first documentation of bifurcated neural spines in a quadrupedal herbivore around today, so that was neat. Now, again, I want to document the soft tissue, because what's going on with those split spines? What soft tissues are associated with it? Well, the Watusi is a cow, so its muscles and everything were pretty much the exact same proportion and everything as a cow. But what was really special and unique was what I've highlighted in green here, which is called the nuchal ligament. The nuchal ligament runs, from back of the head all the way down the hips. They call it a different name once it gets in the back, but for simplicity's sake, nuchal ligament. But what was different about the Watusi was that where in top views we see where the neural spines split, so did the nuchal ligament into a left and right half. And so if we look at other animals today and their nuchals, why did the Watusi have this split and branched ligament that was unlike what we'd expect in other animals? Well, I proposed it had to do with that large head. Now, it's not simply about being able to support that weight. Bison have a big head, right? And they actually shorten the length of their neck, and then they get that big shoulder hump, right? So that's one way you can go about carrying a weight. But for the Watusi, it's not just that the horns are a large weight, it's a large weight that they have to keep mobile off of their shoulders and move around. And so I started looking at other tetrapods, both extinct and extant, and I actually found that bifurcated neural spines are incredibly common and distributed throughout tetrapods. Everyone in this room, you have bifurcated neural spines in your cervicals, so in your neck, because guess what? We have a large mobile weight we have to keep off of our shoulders. And in fact, we don't realize, but part of our ear anatomy is basically like a bubble level, and we don't realize, but we're actually always moving our head to keep it level. So we have to have a large mobile weight off of our shoulders. There are some animals like stegosaurs that also do it in their tails, but again, it's a large mobile weight that's positioned off of the body. So that was really neat. And so I took the muscle proportions of the Watusi, reconstructed them onto a sauropod, and also reconstructed this split ligament system. But during this whole project, there was something that was deeply troubling me, and that was Thompson's sauropod suspension bridge model. And the big reason that this was troubling me, and it'd been so popular for time immemorial, but the big issue is a bridge is meant for static forces, right? A bridge is meant to be stable and things move over it. Generally speaking, if you have a moving bridge, there is a problem. So I kept figuring that the sauropod suspension bridge, while superficially there were elements of it that certainly I think are suitable and analogous, it's not a really good model for the sauropod bow plan. And I kept thinking about this, and it kept troubling me. And I was driving along with my ex-wife one day to go visit her grandparents, and I was thinking about this. We were driving in Montana, and I happened to look off in a field, and I see a thing out in this field that I've seen 1,000 times before in a field. But I realized there in the moment, that was my Newton's apple, that here I was looking at something that was what I thought was a perfect mechanical analog to a sauropod. I was so captivated with it that I, in fact, drove off the road, much to my ex-wife's dismay, and she couldn't understand why I was jumping out of the car and taking pictures of a central pivot irrigator. So those of you who may not be familiar with central pivot irrigators, you know, they're a very popular irrigation system here in the West. If you've ever been flying and you wonder what all those circles are, it's because of these pivot irrigators. And a lot of pivot irrigators, the way they're designed is they have this long horizontally extended piece, that's the sprayer, and then they have these V-shaped brackets that run along the top and a left and right cable that's suspended between these V-shaped brackets. And they are, in fact, when the central pivot irrigator was actually introduced to the world in the 1976 issue of Science magazine, it was hailed and purposely designed that way for dealing with stresses as it moves left and right in a field. So I argued that the central pivot irrigator is a much more better mechanical analog to certain sauropods. But the whole key to this, what I think is the sort of the linchpin, the success story of this, is that split ligament. Now, a lot of animals take advantage of ligaments today, right? The ligaments are elastin, right? They're basically nature's rubber band. So a lot of animals like kangaroos, right? They spend a little bit of muscle energy to start the bounce, and then it's free energy, sort of like a spring stored up in that ligament. Racehorses do it as well. And so sort of analogous to, the drinking bird, tipped on its side, is that's how I proposed was the sustained mechanism to the lateral sweep feeding of Stevens and Parrish, was that people had always wondered with this, like, well, how could they sustain moving their neck side to side for so long? So in this case, the sauropod spends a little bit of muscle energy moving its neck one way or another, and then it can just, using that elastic energy, sweeping side to side to feed. And again, these things are probably feeding, 15, 18 hours a day. So they need a more sufficient way to sustain it. So this Apatosaurus could sweeping, clear one area of vegetation, take one step forward, and it's in an entirely new swath of vegetation, which is way more energy efficient. Because think about it. If you're feeding from a tree, what do you always have to do? You always have to walk around your tree, right? The tree doesn't move or in relation to you. So again, the fact that this horizontal sweep feeding is way more energy efficient. So a way to sustain feeding in these titanic animals. So that's next. The second part we'll talk at that's near and dear is I like their sauropod life history, so how they grew up. So even though sauropods are the largest animals that have ever lived on Earth, they actually do not come from our largest eggs. So the best sauropod nesting colony that we know of in the world to date is a place in South America called Acomoevo. And the eggs there are about the size of a cantaloupe. And we have embryos in the eggs, which that's really helpful because a lot of times we have dinosaur eggs from all over the world, but unless we have embryos in them, it's much harder to say, yes, this egg came from this kind of dinosaur. There are other nesting colonies in South America, and there's another one and elsewhere around the world, like one in the Pyrenees, but we don't have embryos in there, so it's harder to say if those were sauropods. And we do have some baby sauropods. Baby sauropods were not bipedal. Don't trust that top left image. That's just paleo art. They were quadrupedal their whole life, or at least half of them were at least half of the year for a period. But we do have young baby sauropods, and there's a lot we can glean about their life history. Because again, think about it. This animal hatches from an egg the size of a cantaloupe to become one of the largest animals that's ever walked the earth. How long did that take? So that was part of my master's thesis, or really the bulk of my master's thesis, was trying to understand the life history of these diplodocid sauropods. And so the most famous diplodocid sauropod is Diplodocus. So that's what I had the most samples of. And of course, I wanted to understand how long did it take to grow up. And this is easier said than done. Now, paleontologists used to think that dinosaurs were just really big reptiles. And if reptiles take a really long time to grow, a really, really big reptile must take a really, really long time to grow up. So people were coming up with these estimates saying sauropods, it took them centuries to grow up. And this was respectfully not based on anything. It was just hogwash. The way we do it, which I'm sure many speakers here, who've been to the lecture have probably noticed, of course, great research that the Tyrrell does a lot of, is to determine the age of an animal, we do what's called histology. So we actually we break the bone open and we look at the inside. Now, a lot of people refer to this as, destructive, or they think it's damaging. But I will say, you can learn more about the inside of an animal than you ever can. You can learn more about an animal by looking at the inside of its bones than you ever could by looking at the outside. So I think since it's enhancing our knowledge, I refer to it as enhanced sampling. And fossils aren't these rare, pieces of art. They're scientific data points. So let's actually use data to learn something. So I cut open everything I can. I'm even doing the first histology on Sauropod Skulls, right? So let's learn with the data that we have. So I did that. I actually cut open these sauropod bones, and in like manner to counting tree rings, so you see a tree cut down and you see these annual growth rings, you count those rings and you determine how old the tree was. We can do a similar thing in certain bones of dinosaurs. Sauropods are a little weird. We have to do it in their ribs, which is very odd, not their limb bones, because they were growing so fast that growth record gets obliterated in their limb bones. And so what I saw was that in some of our smallest specimens, we saw a minimum of 2 growth lines, which we were then able to indicate that in this 6-meter-long Diplodocus, it was about 2 years old. An 18-meter-long Diplodocus, we see 8 of these growth lines. A lot of them were starting to be, we call it remodeled. We were losing parts of that growth record. So when we basically calculated missing lines, we determined that that animal was an 18-meter Diplodocus, was probably in its low, early teenage years. And in our biggest, oldest Diplodocus specimens that I was able to sample, a 27-meter-long animal, I was able to count 24 growth lines. So we determined that this animal was approximately 30 years old when it died. So again, think about that. 30 years to go from a cantaloupe to 100 feet long, for argument's sake. Dinosaurs, this isn't something new. We know that the dinosaur record that they grew incredibly fast. some duckbill dinosaurs had faster growth rates than sauropods. But again, imagine this. I only partially joke where I bet at times you could watch a sauropod grow, right? They were growing up that fast, especially earlier in their life history. But there's a lot more than we can learn from just how long did it take these animals to grow up. So in these drawings here, these scales, we're looking at animals that are, the way the drawings are related is what we'd call isometric. So that just, the way these drawings are depicted, it shows that, a baby sauropod is just a scaled down version of an adult. And a lot of paleontologists used to think that was sauropods, but it is adamantly, vehemently, 100% opposite. So again, something that's a lot of forefront in paleo research is called, fancy terms for it are radical ontogenetic trajectories. So the poster child for this Triceratops, right? How the horns and the frills change dramatic shape as it grows up. And we see the exact same things in sauropods. And I would argue the animals that we see the greatest size change through their life history are the animals we should expect to see the greatest ontogenetic trajectories in. Now, sauropods, big spoiler, didn't have horns and frills. So what the heck was changing in their skeleton, changing when they were growing? Well, it's the rest of their skeleton, right, to deal with being so big. So I was able to document that through growth, those bifurcated neural spines in adults are not present in the really young immature animals. They have a single rounded neural spine, and it actually grows through ontogeny. Now, this is really neat because this has implications for feeding, right? This is suggesting that young Diplodocus are moving their neck differently than older animals. And if they're moving their neck differently, that probably has something to say that they were feeding differently through growth. But of course, we can talk about necks for food, but if we're talking about food, there's sort of one end of an animal that we have to talk about. Of course, that's the head, right? The business end. And a lot of paleontologists, even a lot of sauropod paleobiologists, think that sauropod skulls are the rarest of rare fossils, and they almost talk about them in, hushed whispers. And this is where I get cocky. I think sauropod skulls you're going to find fewer sauropod skulls than femora lying around in museum collections. But I don't think they're as incredibly rare as people talk about. And in all fairness, I've never had a problem finding sauropod skulls. I find a lot of them. And I even got to work on one really incredible skull. So this, just for reference, because I always like it as a size scale. So this is a cast of an adult Diplodocus longus. So again, you look at that. The body of this animal is about 100 feet long, but the head is basically the size of a horse, right? So just remember that mental picture of how big it is in my hands. And you want to see a baby? This is Andrew. So that's Andrew in my hands. The skull is 9 inches long. In fact, Andrew's the smallest Diplodocus skull that we've ever found to date. And so you can see, like, here are the teeth, here's the eye. Andrew's an amazing specimen. I was really honored and fortunate to work on it. And perhaps there's a lot that we learned through Andrew about the development of the skull of Diplodocus through growth. But perhaps I think the most interesting thing that we learned were about its teeth. So sauropod teeth basically come in two flavors. So there are teeth like Diplodocus, which are these peg-like teeth, and you have Camarasaurus, which you can see, again, a great cast of in the gallery. They have these really spatulate teeth. Now, Andrew's a Diplodocus. It should have just peg-like Diplodocus teeth, and it does have those in the front of its mouth. But in the back of its mouth, Andrew had Camarasaurus spatulate teeth, which is really fascinating, and never before had the two tooth forms ever been documented in a sauropod. Now, we know for a long time that teeth correlate to what an animal's feeding on, right? Like the pointy teeth of a tyrannosaur indicate it was feeding on meat, right? We know that a lot of the similar things for sauropod teeth. So there's been a lot of work over the decades that's shown that the peg-like teeth of Diplodocus, which are more gracile, delicate, are used for softer plant types such as ferns, where the more robust spatulate teeth of Camarasaurus are for coarser vegetation such as cycads. And Andrew, with the two tooth forms, indicates that it was feeding on a variety of plant types, which of course makes sense, right? Instead of being so specialized in a certain kind of plant early in its ontogeny, baby sauropods like Andrew could just have free access to the salad bar, right? Will eat whatever they want. And analogous to like a Swiss Army knife, the different tooth forms mean that these young sauropods could just have at it the right tools for the job for all of the plant types. They could bulk feed everything to grow so incredibly fast. But we were able to learn more about from Andrew than just the head. So here, Andrew shown in blue. The red specimen is the second smallest Diplodocus skull that had been known, and gray is the adult. Now, these body sizes are scaled, its head size to body length. But again, this assumes isometry, right? So the same, proportions through growth, which we know, again, in the whole dinosaur record is clearly wrong. And I wanted to come up with a better picture of what these young sauropods looked like, what the rest of their skeleton looked like. Now, Andrew, we only had a skull, but Andrew comes from a bone bed of 15 other individuals. So I looked at all of the other skeletons that we had, looked at the range of size, variation, shape, etc., and I came up with this. This was a skeletal reconstruction that I made, and I showed this to a bunch of other sauropod colleagues, and unanimous across the board, they all said that, the same answer is, that can't be right. There's absolutely no way that's right. Look at those gangly legs, those proportions. How do you know that's right? What is your supportive evidence? And I very clearly say and believed, my evidence is animals today. Because a lot of baby animals are really stupid looking, right? They have these incredibly long, gangly legs. And this is a hallmark of rapid ontogeny that we see in mammals. It's not only an indication of rapid ontogeny, we see these long leg proportions in animals that often don't have the same degree of parental care, or they have to be highly mobile once they're on their own. And we think sauropods were basically analogous to sea turtles. Parent, mom digs a nest, lays the egg, leaves them on their own. So the young are raised and live in their own sort of set age segregated herds. So they had to be on the move fast, right? We see this again today, right? Puppies, really big paws. They grow into their paws, right? And so I think that a lot of these young sauropods had these really gangly legs because they were basically growing into their legs throughout their life history. So we took all of our science. This was really cool. I never actually got to work with a paleo illustrator before, so I was really honored with that. And so we took our science and we worked with the insanely talented paleo artist Andrei Atuchin. And Andrei took all of our science and made a visual representation of that. So here we see young, gangly Andrew feeding on a different plant type than either one of the two adults. So that was a really fun project, and there's lots more that we not only deciphered about Diplodocus growth and life history, but there's still a lot more work coming up. So one of the things we're doing is, because I have now a wealth of Diplodocus skulls, is from an ontogenetic series, is some of the things we're looking at, for instance, are CT scanning the brain and actually looking at how the brain changes through ontogeny. Lots of really cool work to come. So I hope you've just been able to learn a little bit more and maybe appreciate sauropods a bit more. They are unfortunately quite often treated as being the dumb, very vanilla dinosaurs, and that other than their size, there's nothing special about them. But I hope you've been able to, just from two very brief examples today, see and understand that they actually are incredibly not only interesting and amazing animals, but again, a lot of the biomechanics, the bioengineering that's gone into their life history and their evolution to be able to get to be so big. It's a lot of things that we don't see, in fact, in any other dinosaurs. And so we really, I think, probably a biased opinion, should be doing a lot more research on sauropods. Because if we're trying to understand, for instance, why did dinosaurs get to be so big, maybe it's not a bad idea to look at the biggest of the dinosaurs, right, to try to answer that question, or even how to get big so fast. So with that, I want to thank of course, the Royal Tyrrell Museum here in the speaker series that even was able to bring me here to have a wonderful time. I've had a great week so far looking in collections. We'll have today and part of tomorrow to do that as well. Of course, at Patty Rowrick and Francois for just notifying me about this program and bringing me here. Of course, all of you in attendance today. So thank you very much.